to the Daily Politics. You've said in the past that the UK has nothing to fear from a no deal going forward. Why not?
Well, why should we? It's not the ideal best solution, but it's a perfectly acceptable solution. We already do far more trade with the rest of the world than we do with the rest of the European Union. And the great bulk of that trade is on WTO terms, and it's perfectly acceptable. Mrs. May said right at the beginning, quite rightly, in the Lancaster House speech, I think, that no deal, we're talking about trade deal, not about the deals over citizenship, not European Union citizens here and British citizens like me living on the continent. We're not talking about intelligence sharing. This is simply about trade. And as I say, the bulk of our trade is not with the European Union, and the non-European Union bit is growing much faster. I don't know whether you ever go shopping. You're too busy, actually.
I think you'll find I do.
But you will see goods from all over the world here.
Right. Why do you think it would be a disaster if there was no deal, or, as James McGrory said in that clip, we were to crash out on a cliff edge?
Well, I think, first of all, that it's important to get the figures right. It's not quite true that we trade more with the rest of the world than with the European Union. It was actually Sky, I think, very recently that displayed very well those figures, which is that whenever you are mentioning those figures, you are taking into account gold. And gold, which is a very substantial amount of those figures, simply transits through the UK and is not really part of the trade of the UK. In any case, I think that when you are coming to the WTO, and the effect that it would have to rely on the WTO only, it is very easy to look only at the tariffs. But tariffs is something of the past in trade. It was when Nigel was in government that this really was about the tariffs in trade and the creation of the WTO. That moved to services, and now the whole game of trade is on regulation. And there is nothing in the WTO about regulation. I was a negotiator there. We did bits and pieces, really minimal. That is why it was the UK, Margaret Thatcher at the time, came up with the internal market concept, which is about regulation.
Right, well, on regulation, non-tariff
and it didn't happen. And it didn't happen. It was an aspiration.
Right, but on non-tariff barriers, do you accept that is the big worry for businesses? It is non-tariff barriers.
No, services are particularly important for us, obviously. As Mrs. Clegg says, services are particularly important because they're a large part of our economy. And what Margaret Thatcher, and I was alongside her at the time, what Margaret Thatcher was concerned about was that although there were no tariffs in trade with the European Union, with our friends and partners in the European Union, there were a whole lot of different regulations, and there still are. The promise was the single market would bring regulatory uniformity. It hasn't. But anyhow, anyway, we trade with all over, and the rest of the world trades with the European Union. United States trades with the European Union. China trades with the European Union. The really important thing now is that we prepare for the no-deal outcome, and it is grossly irresponsible if we don't prepare.
Right. Is Phillip Hammond being grossly irresponsible in not preparing now in the way that you would like him to do?
I fear he is, yes.
Why? He says he's not going to waste money at this point. He's the Chancellor. You know what it's like when you're in charge of the money.
Yeah, but you have to spend money from time to time, and there is nothing more important than preparing for what has always been the most likely outcome. I've been on the record throughout the Brexit process is saying the most likely outcome is no trade deal. They do not want to give us a good trade deal nor an acceptable trade deal, not because they dislike us, nothing to do with that, but they are terrified that if they give us a good deal, the pressure in some other countries to leave the European Union will grow.
Is he undermining these negotiations, Phillip Hammond, and undermining the government?
That may not be his intention, but I fear that he is.
So what should Theresa May do?
Well, I think probably a reshuffle.
And where should he be reshuffled to?
That's for her to decide.
Right, but he shouldn't be Chancellor any longer because you think he's holding up these negotiations.
Yeah, I fear that he is unhelpful. Yeah, I fear that what he is doing, he may not intend it, but in practice, what he is doing is very close to sabotage.
Don't you think that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Bernard Jenkin, as we heard from Anna Soubry there, are the ones that are actually destabilising the negotiations with name-calling of treachery, bordering on the dishonest?
Anna Soubry is a fanatic on this issue, a complete fanatic. That's why you had her on the programme. I know that.
Is she a fanatic? Is Anna Soubry a fanatic? Is representing that view
I don't
fanatical?
know Anna Soubry at all, but what I do know is that it is impossible for this country to handle one of the most difficult political times ever, almost a complete reinvention of all the regulation, all the economic model, with all this deep division in the party that is in government. It simply cannot happen, and either the Prime Minister manages to unite the cabinet by changing the cabinet or doing whatever it is, or else you are going to need another Prime Minister.
Right. Well, Miriam Gonzalez has also said that there needs to be a change in the cabinet in order to bring unity. If Philip Hammond were to be reshuffled
we agree on
out,
something, then.
Yeah, you do agree on something. Hurrah! If he were to be reshuffled out, Philip Hammond, who would you like to see as Chancellor who would be able to get a good deal?
I am not going to answer your question for the obvious reason that A, it is Mrs May's choice, not mine, and B, that if I did say, I don't think it would be particularly helpful.
Well, except you've said that Philip Hammond, you think, should be moved, so would Michael Gove be a good Chancellor?
I'm sure that he is one of those who would be.
Any others?
Now, I'm not going to go into this.
On Philip Hammond saying that actually the worst case scenario of no deal, a disorderly exit, would be planes being grounded and lorries stacked up through Kent. Is that a realistic scenario?
It's not realistic, with the exception of this, that if there are no contingency arrangements made, no preparations made, no money spent on preparations, then there might be difficulties of this kind. And that is why it is so irresponsible not to be making those contingency arrangements.
Right. How important would it be, in your mind, Miri, if there were preparations, if there was a lot of money spent on the no-deal scenario, couldn't it work if businesses had time to prepare, that you wouldn't end up with planes being grounded or lorries stacked up through Kent?
Listen, I work as a lawyer in this area, and therefore I don't really look at it so much with the political perspective, emotional and interesting as it is, but from the point of view of what business tell us. And if you ask, for example, any airline, they are all deeply concerned that trying to replace the common aviation area, which is what they deal with, is easy, provides access in both directions. It is a really difficult thing. I cannot answer whether hypothetically, if over many years there was a really competent government and tried to change completely the country, whether that would be possible with a lot of money as well thrown into it or not. But it doesn't seem to me that what I'm seeing right now from the government goes any near that direction.
Right, and if you look at the ongoing trade dispute, Nigel Lawson, between the Canadian firm Bombardier and its rival Boeing, that hardly will inspire people with confidence about this great panacea of future trade deals outside the EU.
Look, there's always problems in life, for goodness sake. But coming back to what businessmen want, what businessmen want is to know where they stand as soon as possible. A prolonged period of uncertainty is the worst possible thing for business. And what worries me is allowing this thing to drag on and on and on. Businessmen want to know where they stand, and then they can handle it, provided, as I say, the government's made the proper preparations, and that is perfectly practicable. And you talk about airlines. Airlines fly all over the world. I mean, airlines don't fly only to the European, our friends on the European continent.
No, of course, but people would be worried if they thought they were going to be grounded even for a short
period
period of
of time.
time.
Yeah, well, they're not going to be if people...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.